Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Insha Rahman, who is the Director of Vera Action, a nonprofit that harnesses the power of advocacy, lobbying, and political strategy. So what is it that you actually do for Vera?
So I'm the director of Vera Action, which is Vera's 501c4. And so the Vera Institute of Justice has been around for 60 years. We are an organization that brings to bear policy and research and real solutions on the ground, working with government and community to end mass incarceration and fight for immigrants' rights, help bring dignity behind bars to the 2 million people there, and build safe, thriving communities. So we've been harnessing policy, research, good legislation for decades. Increasingly, though, it's not just about having the right policy solutions, it's actually having the politics on our side as well. And for anybody who's listening, you're gonna nod your head when you say, tough on crime rhetoric and scare tactics about crime, they're ever present. This isn't a new thing, but it feels like it's been on overdrive in recent years. And so that's really what inspired us to build out Vera Action, our 501c4. And what that means is we're working on all the same policy issues, but we're also leveraging the power of politics, being able to work on electoral issues like campaigns and races, and really be able to sort of be part of the political moment in a way that if you're focused very much on research and policy, there's a gap, there's a distance, and you're not able to influence, power as we need to in order to win on our issues.
And where are you personally based out of?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, New York. All right. So a lot going on in New York right now, a lot going on in the country right now. I'm out in California, and we've been kind of tracking Prop 36, and we just had this poll that came out statewide, which kind of showed Californians wanted tougher sentencing for theft and for fentanyl. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. One is, oftentimes people's very real desire to be safe, to have their neighborhoods feel stable and secure, to have their biggest worry when their kid goes to school is if they bring their backpack home, not if they're going to get shot or make it home okay. Often that's conflated with a desire for wanting more tough on crime punishment and harsher sentences. And that poll that just came out, I actually think it's misleading. And here's why, is because what the poll asked was, do you think crime is a problem? Do you think the opioid crisis is a problem? Do you think retail theft is a problem? Any of us who want to live in safe, stable communities would say all of those things are problems, and that we would want to see less of it, and we would want to see more safety and stability. That said, when you ask, is it a problem, and the only thing you offer is, so would you be supportive of policies that would, allegedly address theft, opioids, and homelessness, people will say yes, as opposed to saying, so what do you think the right responses and solutions are? Because if a poll asked that question, what you'd find is that there'd be far more support, majority support, for people saying, well, we need to prevent crime in the first place and invest in solutions that improve quality of life for all of us, like good schools, affordable housing, access to mental health and drug treatment, and getting illegal guns off the street and getting people the resources they need. That's actually crime prevention and crime fighting, more so than longer sentences and more punishment. But if you don't offer that other alternative, people are going to pick the thing that's on offer because they're hearing nothing else. So that's what I think of that poll is. I think it's a missed opportunity to actually tell a real story about what Californians want. Yes, they are concerned about all of the things to do with retail theft and homelessness and drugs. And if you give them an option of a much more community-driven set of solutions, they will pick that over more punishment and more jail and prison.
And that's been kind of my concern from the start on this issue of especially retail theft. And, one of the problems has been that people conflate all these different things, right? Because they see these videos that go viral. There's people stealing all these things from stores, and then they conflate that with Prop 47, even though for the most part, most of what you see in those videos has absolutely nothing to do with Prop 47.
Yeah, Prop 47 is not going to, rolling back Prop 47, I should say, which is what Proposition 36. Are people thoroughly confused yet? They should be. It's very confusing, I find. But Prop 36 is a measure that's been introduced to roll back some of the most important provisions of Prop 47. I think it's important to just name, David, what would happen if Prop 36 moves forward. First of all, there will be billions of dollars that are taken away that currently go to housing, treatment, and services in communities, and they'll just be gone because Prop 47 put millions and millions of dollars into California's 58 counties, and Prop 36 will roll that back. Additionally, Prop 36 will mandate that DAs can consider longer sentences and charging things as felonies that currently are charged as misdemeanors. And the problem with that is going tough isn't actually going to prevent future crime, and it's not going to help in that particular instance. And so there's nothing in Prop 36 that expands or gives or pushes DAs to do things like, let's get somebody into treatment or services or something that stabilizes them so that we're preventing future crime. So that's what we have to lose if Prop 36 moves forward. And the folks behind Prop 36 are not, in fact, just concerned citizens who are worried about crime. It's actually big box retailers and corporations and the prison lobby that stands to benefit from, if people are being hit with longer sentences, there's more people in jail and prison. You can see sort of like who's behind this and why. So what do you say about, like, what do we do about this? What we need to do is actually remind people when it comes to retail theft, there's a few different things going on. One is there's organized retail crime, and some of the smash and grab videos that you see where sort of people run in and they take really expensive stuff. They're not taking those Fendi bags to, deal with, getting by, living on the streets. They're stealing those bags to go sell them in a secondary market on Amazon, Facebook Marketplace. And so there's actually something that the government can do, the state legislature can do, is pass a bill. That bill has been introduced by Senator Nancy Skinner that would actually regulate secondary marketplaces so that the incentive to go sell that Fendi bag no longer exists because Amazon or Facebook Marketplace or eBay won't take it because they have to look at the origin, the provenance of the bag and realize this is stolen counterfeit goods, right? So that's one thing that we can do to literally cut that problem off at the knees, but that takes being willing to go up against the big corporations like Amazon and Facebook Marketplace that benefit from having really no requirements to actually check the origins of the goods that are sold there. So that's one thing that they can do, and that would actually make a huge difference. And then we've all seen increasingly sort of toothpaste and razor blades and everything else under lock and key. And the best way to address that is two things. One is to simply have more workers in the store. Anybody who goes into a store where somebody greets you and says, "What do you need today?" And then you get help, you can literally go pick up your toothpaste yourself. You can literally organize the store, the layout of the store, and have enough workers so that you don't need to put up everything under plastic lock and key. That's a better experience for any of us shoppers and consumers. It's a better experience for retail workers as well. So that's a second thing that could be done, and stores could be required to have a minimum staffing based on square footage, based on volume of customers and so on. And then the third is, again, charging people and putting them in jail for stealing toothpaste and other things to get by, not going to fix the problem. And business owners want to know, I need to be able to do something. I can't tell you how many times we've heard a business owner say, the cops tell me not to even bother calling when somebody comes in and steals $200 worth of stuff because I can't even make an arrest, or if I do, they're just going to be out on the street, so they do nothing. That's not fair to those store owners, especially small business owners whose margins are really small anyway. What could they do? The Business Improvement District can set up a mobile crisis response team so that the store owner, when they get somebody who is just like stolen a bunch of stuff, they can actually call that mobile crisis response team and have them come do a warm handoff, get that person connected to services. So next time they don't need to steal toothpaste, they actually have their needs met.
So I didn't want to interrupt your flow there, but just wanted to point out that Senator Skinner's bill, SB 1144, passed the legislature this week. Although by the time this airs, it will probably have been signed into law by Governor Newsom, but I did want to reference that.
Yeah, it's a good, smart move in the right direction.
Yeah, and one of my concerns has been there's been a lot of attention on fentanyl and the drug epidemic, but it seems like we're moving in the wrong direction on that, especially in California, where we're starting to see in the courts people are getting charged with murder for those for selling it. And we're losing focus on the fact that we're not going to incarcerate our way out of this problem. We're not going to law enforce our way out of this problem. We need to treat this like a health problem and get people the health that they need. We recently had a woman on our show a few weeks ago, who's on the front lines of that. And, there are all sorts of very innovative programs that are helping people get access to services, and that's far more effective in fighting drugs than trying to arrest people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what is the problem with drugs and the prevalence of fentanyl? It's that people are dying, and people are dying at astonishing and debilitating rates, right? Last year, we had the highest number of overdose deaths in this country than we have ever had. And so what we know is the first line of defense here is to keep people alive, and ratcheting up sentences and adding, more consequences and punishment under the law is not going to deter people, and it's also not going to stop the flow of fentanyl, because it's literally coming from being manufactured abroad into our communities. And there's no sort of there's not enough punishment or trying to sort of do raids and intercept fentanyl deliveries that will actually solve the problem. What does work though is really basic stuff like fentanyl testing strips and having those be free and available in vending machines. Likewise, there was an experiment in some cities to put Suboxone and Narcan and other drugs literally in places where you could get them more easily, like vending machines. Those measures are life-saving. They really are, because they allow communities to take control of harm reduction and actually sort of dealing with finding out what's in the drug supply. So I know that sounds to many people, well, that feels very loosey-goosey, but think about another thing that in the last 50 years has just become commonplace, where you can get it easily in the community: birth control, right? And that's a thing that now nobody questions. And in fact, when the Supreme Court decision in 2022 and Dobbs came down and sort of all kinds of access to reproductive health care was under threat, people were like, are you kidding? We need to make sure that people have access to birth control, Plan B, and so on. And I actually think there is an opportunity, if we talk about the drug crisis and the opioid overdose crisis in the right ways, that we can turn it into a question of access and everybody's right to good health care, much in the way that we have done with reproductive health care and reproductive justice. So I think there is a real sort of lesson to be learned from other movements that we should take a page from when it comes to what we're dealing with the drug crisis now.
So I do want to shift gears a little bit, because there is this kind of interesting presidential race going on. And
There is.
I've been around for a long time and watching this stuff, and I've never seen anything like what we've seen this year. And we could probably go at 50 different levels on that. But, Kamala Harris is an interesting figure, and it's weird to think, but 15 years ago, I was interviewing her when she was DA running for Attorney General at a Starbucks in San Francisco. Now she's running for president, so it's a little surreal to me.
Yeah, wow, that's wild. Do you have a highlight from that interview that you remember?
Well, the biggest highlight I remember was how brief it was. Like she, I had like 10 questions, and I had interviewed all of the candidates for Attorney General, and there were like 4 or 5,
Mhm.
including Ted Lieu, who is now a fairly prominent congressperson. Um, and she was giving one-line answers to very complex questions. And so I came out of that, not with a very strong opinion of her,
Yeah.
which is interesting. The other interesting thing is because she was DA in San Francisco, and I know a lot of people in the public defender's office in San Francisco, none of them had a very positive view of her. And in fact, in 2020, I remember being at an event for Chesa Bodine when he was running for DA, and I couldn't find anyone who was actually supporting Kamala for president in her own city. And yet, she seems to have transformed herself rather remarkably in the last few years.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two things going on. I think Kamala Harris has herself evolved, as many people do, on issues of safety and accountability and justice and how do we approach crime. I also think the world around us has changed and changed back, right? So there are a couple of different forces that have led to this moment of where for Kamala Harris now, it is a benefit and a boon to her campaign to lean into her experience as a prosecutor. She can take the case to Donald Trump. That is something she says left, right, and center of, I have like put away the bad guys. I have prosecuted, the greedy. Like, trust me when I say I know Donald Trump's type. And I think there is something in that is not just about being a prosecutor, but about being somebody who is unafraid to go after like corruption and greed and self-interest that resonates with people. And where we have seen VP Harris be most effective in her messaging, and we've actually done some polling on this, is not when she talks about prosecutor versus felon. And we'll get into for a second why that is both stigmatizing and offensive, and also as a matter of politics, not effective. But in our polling and what we have seen out on the campaign in the past month is when she actually talks about being for the people, a thing DAs say every single day in court. I'm a former public defender. I remember hearing that thousands and thousands of times. And, we can talk about people's skepticism about which people are you representing. We'll get to that in a second. But when she says, I'm for the people and I stand for safety and accountability and justice. And Donald Trump, he is only in it for himself. He considers himself above the law and he is corrupt. It's that values contrast that actually is working for her in this moment. It's not the sort of like, kind of reductive and I find offensive prosecutor versus felon binary.
Yeah, and I just want to say before we drill down into this a little bit more that I think one of the problems that I have in politics is that we assume that everybody is static throughout their lives. And I can tell you, I'm not in politics. And my views on criminal justice issues have really evolved a lot in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And so to pigeonhole somebody to what their views were, 15 years ago, I don't think is fair. it's like we suddenly forget that people can grow and develop and think. And I understand, we like consistency and we want to nail inconsistency. Oh, you said this 10 years ago. Now you're being political and you're saying, well, okay, fair
Maybe,
enough. That
right?
happens for sure. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna negate that, but I think there's also an evolving conception. I mean, think about this. Just take another example. 2008, Prop 8 passed overwhelmingly in California.
Yep.
If that were put on the ballot again, it would get probably less than 30% of the vote. And that's by the public. And the public's not being political. They've just evolved on this issue. They're much more comfortable with the issue.
Yep.
And so I do feel like that gets lost, and it actually bothers me a little bit, because we want to say, the other thing that I think I take issue with is this notion, Kamala Harris is a San Francisco liberal.
Mhm.
Kamala Harris, I mean, there are kind of two different types of people in San Francisco, right? There's like the liberals and then the really, really liberals, right? And she was maybe in the liberal camp, not the liberal camp, or what we might call progressive camp. So,
Yeah.
um,
San Francisco moderate. I mean, the way that she
yeah.
described herself in her, 2009 book was very much like right down the middle, right? And so it is interesting to watch the caricature of it as opposed to actually judging her on her actions and her record.
So now that I've said all that,
Yeah.
I mean, what is your view of a prosecutor running now for president? And I also saw something else interesting. Like she would be only the second president who's an attorney not to be in like the top 14 schools. So that's an interesting thing as well.
Yeah. Um, so I think she has a path forward where she can use the fact that she is a longtime prosecutor to her benefit and not alienate the folks, especially on the left, who rightfully have criticisms of some of her policies and some of her practices, both when she was the DA in San Francisco as well as the Attorney General. And to your point, David, I think she needs to own, just as we appreciate evolution in everyday people, politicians evolve too. And she's got to explain how she gets to her 2019 2020 platform from her days back in 2004 when she was first San Francisco DA. You've got to tell a story about that, because otherwise people worry that you are being political or that you're being inauthentic. And authenticity matters in everyday people, it matters in politicians too. But the way that she can actually walk that line and have a big tent approach is, first of all, not to go tough on crime, lean in all the way there, because you're actually not winning with moderates. Moderates have heard tough on crime for a long, long time. And they're like, I've been hearing that for 30, 50 years. Didn't really seem to be working. And you will alienate the base of the Democratic Party, Black voters, young voters, voters of color who think tough on crime, who hear tough on crime and think tough on me as a person of color. And so what she can do instead is stand for values, safety, accountability, justice across the country. Democrats, independents, and frankly, most Republicans would agree safety, accountability, justice sounds good. So she should lead with values, and then she should actually name what the problem is with Donald Trump, that he doesn't have those same values, that he is motivated by self-interest, that he's corrupt, that he considers himself above the law. And then she actually should own criminal justice reform as well. Because right now we are watching Donald Trump make what is a cynical ploy to appeal to Black voters by saying, I too am convicted. I too have been railroaded by this system. And I passed the biggest criminal justice reform when I was president. When in fact, out of the other side of his mouth, he's talking about unleashing law enforcement to go sort of like, occupy cities and, rough up suspects when you arrest them, and all kinds of other very, very tough on crime things, complete immunity for police, and so on. So what Kamala Harris needs to do is call him out on the hypocrisy and the cynical exploitation of voters using sort of his own, conviction as well as his record. And she needs to stand for criminal justice reform as well. And she's got plenty, both from her time in Congress as well as her most recent positions that she should draw upon that in fact are popular with voters. So talking about making sure safety and not wealth is the determining factor of who is released or who stays in jail after an arrest, that's bail reform. She was the champion, along with Senator Rand Paul, Republican senator, of the Pretrial Integrity and Safety Act when in Congress. That's actually a very popular bill if you break it down to it's about safety, not wealth. Contrast that with Donald Trump paying a huge million dollar bail in his civil case because because he's wealthy. The two-tiered system of justice doesn't serve everyday Americans, it serves Donald Trump. And so on. Like there's a lot there that she can own. But if she backs away from that, if she does what Democrats often do when they're attacked for being quote unquote soft on crime, she either ducks and is like, let me talk some more about the economy or abortion or democracy, or she says, let me demonstrate I too am tough on crime. She's not going to win, certainly not as a matter of policy, but also as a matter of politics, because if voters, and this is not just the base voters of Black voters and young voters, but even independent, moderate voters, if they hear, I stand for values, and those are safety and accountability and justice, you actually create a big tent where everybody can see themselves in it. They can see themselves in her. That's the winning formula for her, and she has an opportunity to really lean in.
Yes, but I think her instincts are not going to push her in that direction.
No, but I think we've got to do our work to push her, right? That's the other thing about politicians, like everyday people. They can be influenced and they respond to where they see power.
And from your perspective, I mean, I know this gets into this kind of dichotomy of tough on crime, soft on crime. Where would you situate her?
I would situate her right down the middle, and somebody who has a real opportunity, and it will be seen as genuine if she leans into being serious about safety, serious about accountability, serious about justice. David, a phrase that we've tested, we've done a lot of polling and messaging work on how to talk about crime, how to talk about issues of safety and justice. And one thing we've found is when you hear tough on crime, responding by saying, no, I too am tough on crime, or, well, no, I'm not tough on crime, I'm smart on crime. You're still talking about crime, which is the thing that people don't want. I don't want it, you don't want it, nobody wants it. If you turn the conversation to saying, I'm serious about safety, about accountability, about justice, that's where the conversation starts to win for you, because you're getting off the opposition's narrative playing field and onto your own.
And this is where I think the progressives don't do well, because I feel like progressives play ball in the tough on crime territory, even when they're not. They want to talk about, and I remember a few years ago was the Professor John Pfaff, basically made the argument that, if you're arguing that crime is down, crime is down, crime is down, you're actually playing the ball game in the tough on crime territory, because basically what you're saying is, well, we can do these policies as long as crime is down. And then what happens when crime goes back up? And sure enough, 2 months later, crime's back up. This seems to be a dangerous place to play.
Yeah, I think the fixation on crime rates, for a different reason than Professor Pfaff, I think the fixation on crime rates is a problem for progressives, because people's sense of safety and stability in their communities, it's not determined by whether the crime rate is going up or down. It's determined by certainly their perception of like the sense of order or disorder that's happening in their communities. It's also shaped by what they see on the news, and we have seen coverage of crime literally increased exponentially since 2020. That is just a fact. And what politicians and people with big platforms are saying. That's what shapes people's perception of crime. And I would say progressives are generally not good at that game because they think it's a loser. Every poll and every political consultant in the Democratic universe will say crime's a loser for Democrats. Republicans just have an advantage. But we are increasingly seeing Democratic politicians and progressive ones, Summer Lee, for example, just won a really tough primary in Western Pennsylvania against a tough on crime Democratic challenger who accused her of being the defund candidate and so on. She stood her ground and she said, this isn't about funding or defunding the police. It's about making sure we have real solutions that work to make our communities safe. You just turn it onto, again, your own narrative playing field, and you get back to the thing people really want, which is not to debate tough or soft on crime, but to talk about real solutions for safety. You start to win in that conversation. So for progressives, my advice here is get off the opposition's narrative playing field. And to Professor Pfaff's point, if you're arguing about crime rates, you're on their playing field. Get onto our own, where we actually win when we lead with values that matter to all voters.
And you mentioned the media coverage, and I, as a media person, have a lot of problems with the media coverage because I keep hearing all over the state, all over the country, people are saying, oh, the crime is so bad, I've never seen it so bad.
Yeah.
Where were you 20 or 30 years ago when the crime rate was more than double? I mean, there is just no perspective that goes on. It's these lurid details of these smash and grabs, and I'll sit in my room, and I don't normally watch TV, but my wife will watch the local news because she wants to see what's going on. I want to unplug generally, but she wants to see what's going on, and it's crime. Somebody gets killed, somebody's shot, somebody steals something. And at one point I said, no wonder everybody thinks that crime is going up, because half the local broadcast is crime.
Yeah. I will just say this, David. I don't blame everyday people for seeing that, taking that in, and feeling genuinely afraid. Like, I think perspective is a hard thing when you are 40 years old and you don't really remember what things were like in the 70s or even the 80s or the early 90s, right? Where I think we have to put blame and take ownership of how does this issue get talked about and covered is in the media, and then also with politicians. Because at the end of the day, the media needs to cover somebody, some spokesperson. Who do you see most often? It's the mayor or the DA or the local state legislator, right? And so those are the folks that we need to get on the right message. And part of how we get them there is to say, not that like you're talking about this the wrong way, I don't like it as a progressive. It's to say this isn't actually in your self-interest. You're only perpetuating and fueling a problem of your own creation. And again, I told you I'm a Brooklynite. I live in New York City. Mayor Eric Adams, he ran on a platform of being like all about crime. It was literally the only thing he talked about. And then he has, put in a lot of measures like more police in the subways, more arrests, more enforcement. Crime has continued to stay the same, go up in some ways, but New York City hasn't had the great crime decline that we're seeing in other cities like Detroit or St. Louis or Baltimore or other places, San Francisco even. And it's really backfiring against the mayor because he said, I'm the only person who can deal with crime. You should be really scared of it and we need tough on crime. He's done all of those things and it's not working. And so it's backfiring against him. And so I hope there are lessons learned for other Democrats, folks who think of themselves as progressive. There is a new way to approach safety, and using our old failed tricks isn't going to work.
So we're almost out of time, but I did want to ask this question. Where can Kamala go in terms of issues and messaging so that she's kind of on safe ground, but she can kind of advance a more reformist agenda?
She can talk about what the opposition is doing. And right now they are running ads calling, her dangerously liberal and featuring criminals for Kamala and like literally cherry picking stories. She needs to call that out for what it is, because if you don't, people then have no reason to think it is false. So she should start by saying, here's what I stand for. Go back to those values everybody cares about: safety, accountability, and justice. Call out the opposition. Those scare tactics, they're only intended to play upon and exploit fear. They're not offering you any real solutions that prevent crime and make our communities safe. And then you go to what actually does work. And what people want when it comes to safety is to prevent crime in the first place, make sure there's a real response to crisis that goes well beyond police. People think of crisis in many ways: mental health, drugs, and so on. And then to stop violence. And what we have seen is programs like community violence intervention and other community-based programs work really well. So she actually has a frame that can attack and get at and counter what the opposition is doing, as painting her as dangerously liberal, and then turn the conversation to where she is on solid ground. And she actually has a good track record to run on. The Biden-Harris administration has put more into community violence intervention programs than any other administration. There's real results. Detroit, you're seeing homicides way down. Likewise, in Baltimore and St. Louis. Like, we can speak to those things, but also say, and we have more to do. So that's the frame in which she can sort of walk all paths carefully and appeal to all voters, even voters who don't start where you and I probably start, which is, we wake up thinking about justice, but all voters care about safety. And if you start at the safety door and walk them through it, we can get most people to justice, because so long as people believe we can have safety and justice, one doesn't come at the cost of the other, we win.
Great. Well, great discussion. Very interesting year. And we still we haven't even hit the convention yet.
Yeah. Dave, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we've been talking with Insha Rahman. She's the director of Vera Action with Vera Institute of Justice. Great organization, does a lot of great work on criminal justice reform. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com.